Well, I got saved in high school because a friend in 8th grade kept bugging me to come to youth group. I finally went, and after about a year and a half of hearing the gospel, so 8th and 9th grade, halfway through 10th grade, one time I went to youth group, and I saw a Bible, and I remember looking at the youth pastor and saying, "Could I take one of these?" And he was like, "Sure, they're for you all." I took it home and tried to read it. Grace, mercy, peace, what are they talking about? And I was a big reader. So this was confusing to me, like how come I couldn't understand it? And then after like 3 weeks of trying to read, all of a sudden the lights turned on. And all of a sudden it makes sense. And then I couldn't stop reading it. And I was super, super, super into it. Went on my first mission trip right away to the Dominican Republic, and I just wanted to serve God with my whole life. Like I was just so blown away that I had an answer for all my questions about the meaning of life. Finally, having someone say, God created the world, we're here for him, he saves us. That's just what I needed. Because I remember asking my 4th grade teacher, what happens to us when we die? I didn't have an answer for that. And she said, we don't know. No one's ever come back from the dead to tell us. So that was the only answer I had. Whereas halfway through 10th grade, all of a sudden, I knew about someone who had come back from the dead to tell us. But I think graduate school is when I started thinking, wow, isn't this great what I can do for God? And that was I think that was the beginning of the change. Then we moved to Wheaton after I finished grad school, and my husband got a job, I got a job, got my dream job actually, for a Christian relief and development agency that had their headquarters there. And I loved that job. It was an idol. The fatal flaw was when I started just working. And there's so many verses like this, you know, if you spend yourself on behalf of the needy and give yourself on those who are hungry, God will make your righteousness shine. Like, there's a lot of verses you have to be careful when you read, and especially when you're a believer, you know, love your neighbor as yourself. Well, but first comes love for God. As far as my faith goes, yes, I never lost faith in God. I could go to church. I could do Bible study all day long. I could even memorize verses, because that's in your head. But my heart was saying, why? And I didn't find an answer that satisfied my heart. After I had kids, I just was busy. And then I went back to work when they were in elementary school thinking, well, I can work from home. And sure enough, my old job was perfectly happy to take me working remotely because I was already familiar with the programs, familiar with their models, and I could help with grant writing. But my spiritual life, I had slowly been kind of starving. In fact, in 2012, it came to a head because we were working on a malnutrition program for malnourished kids in Rwanda. So I was spiritually malnourished. I wasn't feeding my heart with trust in God. And when a child is malnourished, guess what? They get sick. Or there's an initial infection, TB or whatever, pneumonia, malaria, and then they lose their appetite, and then they get malnourished. So it's a vicious cycle. And this is what was happening with me, only I didn't know it, and I didn't even admit it to myself, much less tell anyone. But when Deb visited, she just looked at me with a smile and said, "How are you doing, friend?" And I remember just looking at her and saying, "Not good." What did Deb do? She asked, but in a non-judgy way. She just could tell something was wrong. I wasn't excited about God like I used to be. I was killing myself working and trying to, do it all myself, basically, because I wasn't living by faith. When Jesus said to the Pharisees, "These people honor me with their lips, but their hearts are far from me." And that's where I was at, but I didn't know what to do about it. I hadn't found a Bible study that combined head and heart like I had in college until I joined Bible study fellowships. And they have rules. You can't complain about your husbands, and they have trained leaders. And so I was like, okay. And so I went, and it's true. The questions started off with head questions. What's going on in the passage? So it's like inductive Bible study. But then it would be like, what do you think? I remember the verse in Isaiah when it said, I am the God of calamity. So doing the study, I saw that verse, and it was like God said, you have to deal with this. You have to deal with this. I went to the lesson, and I remember saying to the leader, wow, this week's lesson was really tough for me. And she said, oh, maybe you could share. And I went, no, don't ask me to talk about this. And then I couldn't. And then I went into the lecture, and while the teaching leader was talking, she said, as if God speaking to the Israelites, why don't you trust me? And that particular phrase was like a knife in my heart. God had pinpointed my problem. I had stopped trusting him. Why? Because I didn't have a good answer that satisfied my head and my heart. I knew God couldn't be wrong. I knew I was saved, but I just stopped growing. So I was stunted and I was malnourished, and I was slowly, spiritually starving to death. But that was the beginning of the healing. It took about 3 years. And one thing God did, a couple things. I stayed in that study, and I was back in the Word, and I was getting heart and head questions, because it was about, do you trust God? Do you trust God? Not about, what does this passage say? But then in 2013, when God was like, time for you to quit working, which Deb led me around to, I was so devoted, but it was killing me. And did I ever think of asking God, is this what you want me to do? So I started meeting with Deb every week. We would read a little bit together, and it was like, when you're trying to feed a child that's malnourished and they're sick, they do this. They don't want to eat. And that was me. I was like, before I had such a hunger for the Word when I first got saved, and slowly that hunger had gone away. And anytime you don't have an appetite, something's wrong. I was a sick baby. So Debbie, every week, we'd meet, and she would say, how's it going this week? And some weeks I could say, well, like 3 days. I read the Bible in the morning, I read a psalm or whatever. And then other weeks she would ask, and I would just be like, nothing. And this went on for a while. And then another cool thing she did was she said, oh, do you know about extended time alone with God? And I was like, yeah, I used to always do that, but that went by the wayside. And she's like, Olga, come on over to the Glen. They'll let me on, and we'll have 3 hours. And so she invited a couple other friends too. I remember sitting down with her Extended Time Alone with God Quiet Time booklet and starting to read it. And it was almost like this is what I needed. I needed a force feeding session. I needed to sit there and read all these different verses, and all of a sudden there was the beginning of a hunger. You can just stay busy with work, stay busy with volunteering, stay busy with everything, and not go to God. Your hearts are far from him. So I would say after that, my appetite started coming back. Every single story, God was saying, you need to stop working. Abraham, leave your country. Olga, leave work. Olga, stop working. Abraham put Isaac on the altar. And I was like, I have to put my work on the altar and stab it through the heart. And it was so hard. It was so hard. It was so hard. But it came to a head in the spring, and I was like, I have to. What Deb did is what we would say to mothers who have malnourished children. Put them up on your lap, and you have to feed them one bite at a time. And that's what Deb did for me. She's like, got me on her lap, kind of spiritually, and said, here's a mouthful. Wasn't that yummy? Okay, here's another one. And it took months and years of coming back to full health. Being honest, I would say being honest with God about whatever question you have is the first step. If someone doesn't have faith yet, just keep praying for them, keep sharing with them little short things. And you just never know what's going to help them. It's a broken world, but God did come to save it. There is a way to come back to faith, and God understands our doubts. Jesus prayed for Peter. It says Jesus is always praying for us, and pray to come back to faith and get someone to help you, or if you see someone in that boat, pray for them and help them and think of ways to feed their spirit.